Redditors who found out a close friend or family member was a sexual predator or abuser. How did you find out, and how did you handle the situation? Not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I found out my ex-husband of 10 years was a pedophile when he impregnated his new girlfriend's 12-year-old. I knew him 10 years prior to marrying him. You can absolutely not know. I called the police immediately. I found a video from a hidden camera in our bathroom on my husband's tablet. The video showed my 14-year-old niece nude. I cooperated with police fully, and they went on to find more images of my niece. My husband never came home again. I've only seen him in court since. I thought we had a strong marriage, and he was a good man. Now he's in prison, and I'm figuring out single mom life. I was raped and molested by a close family member. When I told my mother about it, she didn't believe me, so it continued for 5 years. He later went to prison for it, and I haven't seen him in 20 years. I learned my grandfather was a pedophile immediately after he died. It wasn't a practical issue because he was dead. Emotionally, it was and is weird. I have zero bad memories of him, but I can also look back and realize that my parents were very careful that I was never alone with him. I found out my father had been molesting my sister for like 6 months. It was my birthday when I found out. I found out because she was crying instead of going to bed. Me being me, I wanted to make sure she was okay and see why she was crying. Well, after I found out, I immediately told my mom, who in turn told the police. I went out and stood in a blizzard in my pajamas. They divorced. He went to jail for a couple weeks, and she's had mental health problems ever since. A few family members have been very publicly shamed and charged with sexual misconduct. I have to avoid details because of Google, but after I gave an honest opinion to one of said family members, the rest of my family backed them up and thought I was out of line. More or less, I've been estranged. We learned after my cousin died she was fighting brain and breast cancer for several years, that her husband would take advantage of her weakened state and force himself on her whenever he wanted. Needless to say, he was kicked off the farm she owned and ostracized from the family, and nobody ever speaks of him anymore. I felt awful that I didn't know he was taking advantage of her in the worst ways while she was dying. Somebody in our family obviously knew, because she told somebody, but they didn't help. I can't help but feel so angry that she died miserable and not surrounded by loved ones. My grandfather was a pedophile, and I got caught in his web. My stepmother knew about it and still let me go over to his house. When I was a teen, he showed me hetero porn, knowing it would have an effect. He did things to me that my confused teenage brain had trouble dealing with, but when he tried to anally rape me, it finally caused my fight or flight reflex to kick in. I did everything in my power to never see him again. When I found out later that my father had been subjected to the same abuse and that my mother and stepmother both knew what he was capable of, it caused years of alienation with both of them. It had caused me to question my own orientation, because what happened wasn't initially threatening, and the fact that my body responded, I thought for a time I might be gay. At 50, it still causes me bouts of anger, confusion, and doubt. Seek help if you have had anything happen to you that causes you strife, mentally or physically. You are not alone. You're not going to be misunderstood. There have been too many of us with similar experiences, and we need to help each other. I will not post with a throwaway, because it is my reality, and shame is a tool used against us that I refuse to acknowledge. I can tell you from the perspective of the abused. I was molested when I was 11 by my uncle. I was also raped from 12 to 15 by his son. I reported them when I was 15. My aunt called me a whore and said that I wanted it. The rest of my family found out pretty quickly, and I became a social pariah. Nothing happened to any of them. She still stayed with and supported them, and the rest of the family hated me. Then, when I was 19, my uncle attempted to sexually assault me again. Then, when my aunt was yelling at me one day, I told her off for staying with a child molester and birthing a rapist. Needless to say, the only person I talk to is my grandma. My cousin used to molest me. I was still a minor at the time and he wasn't. This kept on going for some months as far as I remember, and one day my dad caught him insisting on me and he punched him in the face and told him to never cross our paths again. Never seen him since. When I was in high school, my friend group found out that someone we were close to had molested and raped his little sister, a couple grades below us, because he got arrested for it. It apparently had been going on for months. We immediately disassociated with him, and it was really horrifying to hear about knowing how close we were with him. I think only one person remained friends with him, and we don't really associate with him either. I don't know how she's doing now, but I really hope that she got the help she needed. I've got a much older cousin who my sister and I always thought was creepy. Only saw him a few times a year at family functions, but he always seemed way too interested in us considering the age gap, and just different from our other much older male cousins. Many years later, he ended up going to jail for molesting his stepdaughter. After he got out, he violated his parole by dating a teenage girl who was still a minor, and I believe went back to prison. Found out both my grandfathers on either side were pedophiles. My dad's dad used to molest all his boys, and 3 out of 5 sons committed suicide, my dad included. My mom's dad had a kid with his own daughter, and they put it up for adoption. My mom's dad used to bring her on fishing trips and molest her there. I'm not handling it the best, but my mom handled it all extremely well. How does one heal from this sort of stuff anyway? Not a family member, but a boss at a former job. He had been the editor of a local paper until it folded, and some recognition in the community. He attempted to meet up with 14-year-old girls in a motel. It was a police sting, and he was busted. Found out because they published it all, including his picture, in the competing paper. Makes you think about any interactions you've had with them. I was abused by an older cousin when I was a kid. He used to beg me to ask his parents to stay over at his house, and I always gave in because he'd never let it go. When it got time for bed, he'd go to the toilet and come back in his bedroom wearing just his boxer shorts, and he'd have a full erection. We'd sleep in separate beds, but as soon as the lights went out, he was in my bed rubbing himself on me. I won't tell you what else happened, as it's really disgusting. It took me another 20 years to tell my parents, but by the time I did, I told them I don't want to go to the police, as over the years, he's lost the plot because of excessive drug use over the years and was basically a nutcase. He'd also lost a child in an unfortunate drowning incident, so I thought to myself that karma had already given him vengeance and nothing has been said about it ever since. It really messed me up, to be honest. I have 2 of these, unfortunately. My grandfather abused my aunt for years when she was a child. He tried to rape my mother as well. She says he didn't succeed, but I don't know that was true. It came out when I was a kid fighting with my mom. Bipolar disorder is hereditary in my family, and I was having an episode. We were yelling at each other. I told her that I hated my life and she could never understand. Out of the blue, she yelled, "Your father never tried to molest you." Everything stopped. It was like a slap across the face. I was so shocked. For the rest of his life, I tried to avoid him and felt uncomfortable when I saw him. He had become a monster in the space of a minute. As I got older, I learned more about it. My grandmother denied everything and told my aunt not to talk about it. She refused to leave him. When my sister and I were born, my mom told them that they would never see us if he showed even the slightest hint of abusing us. Be it beating us, he did that too, or touching us inappropriately. I'm surprised that she let them have any place in our lives at all, but she'd loved her own grandparents so much that she just was so hopeful that they would change and we would get to have that relationship. The second time it came up in my life was with my ex's dad. My ex had 3 siblings, 1 full sister and a half-sister and half-brother from his mother. It turned out that my ex's father had molested the half-sister, his stepdaughter, for over a decade. The mother knew, but never did anything until the half-sister outed him to the whole family. I found out about this shortly after the ex and I started dating because there was a family event where the half-sister was going to be there, and so his father was not allowed to come too, and it would be like that for everything. My ex swore that his dad would never do anything like that again. When I told him that if we had children, they would never be allowed to be alone with his dad, he was upset and hurt by it. He looked up to his dad and couldn't see how that sort of thing isn't something you just forgive people for. The half-sister was so traumatized that the family had decided to forgive him and more or less sided with him instead of kicking him out and rallying around her. They thought they could forgive him and be on her side. I can't imagine how betrayed and isolated she must have felt. It made me sick to see him. In the end, it was one of the reasons I broke up with my ex. He just couldn't admit that there are some things people don't deserve forgiveness for. After the divorce, it emerged that my uncle abused his stepdaughter. I then made it my business to stalk him online every few months. When he became a physical therapist at a school, I emailed the head of the school with the story, with permission of my aunt and cousin, and he was terminated. I still search for him. My uncle is alleged by his own daughter and 2 of her friends to have sexually abused them, all when they were around 8 or 9. The man has always been a cunt, but this pushed opinions over the edge because when the allegations were made, nobody seemed surprised. My cousin is an alcoholic with some severe mental health issues who, because of her piece of shit father, is completely self-destructive. I have told my parents if or when he gets in contact, I would expect them to blank him completely. It's tough for my dad because he and Nancy uncle are closest in age of all his siblings, so we're close, or as close as you can be to a cancer on society. One day, someone will tell me that he is dead, and I will smile because the world will be a better place. One person I took a bunch of swimming instructing life-saving courses with and often was partnered with almost 10 years later was busted for organizing the world's largest CSA site and had physically participated in such. Honestly, I felt dizzy and nauseous and nearly vomited when I found it all out. We were Facebook friends but didn't talk much outside of weekly classes, but those 4-hour-long classes are quite physical, meaning hands-on and doing carries, CPR training, spinal rollovers, etc. So yeah, he taught swimming lessons for years, and that makes me sick too, because it is very hands-on as well. I taught for many years, and the little kids are always grabbing onto you, and you have to hold them to show them how to float and stuff. I still struggle with it, wondering if I could have or should have picked up on something when we were teenagers. My dad has been a registered sex offender since the mid-80s. I found out from his sister who told me and also told me whom he molested. He went to jail and was raped over and over. They kept moving him around and the corrections officers told him to stand up for himself and to be a man. He never did. His mother would terrorize my mother and would shoot at her. My mom eventually moved us to South Carolina. We moved from New York. He still blames the victim for what happened, who was a child, and doesn't take responsibility even today. After I confronted him through text messages, he said I was cut off, as in he no longer talks to me. None of his children talk to him. He had various health issues, and I think he's dying, but I'm not sure. 2 of my best friend's brothers were abused by their dad and uncle, grade A pieces of shit. We were in the mid-90s playing on a roller hockey team together and got to know one another real well. We were your classic angsty teens and connected. We ended up being a defensive pairing, and we would shut folks down. One weekend, we had the whole team stay the night post a win. 15 sweaty dudes throughout the house. God love my parents. They were great sports about it. The youngest of the brothers and I were passing the puck around and jumping the ramp we built that weekend, and he launches into it in a, I need to say this kind of way. Man, this hit me hard. I was angry, confused, and then I just started crying and hugged him. We both just bawled for what seemed like an eternity, but likely just a couple of minutes. His dad was long gone by this time in his life and later went on to die alone from what we found. The 2 brothers went on to make their life one that is polar to what experienced. My uncle, he was more or less disowned when I was a teenager, but I didn't clock it until later. Basically, he was known for cheating on my aunt, and then one year at a family gathering, he tried to assault my mom. My otherwise peaceful dad beat the shit out of him and threw him out of the house. Had no idea because I wasn't there at the time, and my parents kept it from me. I figured it was because he was a bad alcoholic. The uncle in question contacted me a few years back on Facebook, asking about why he was misunderstood. I told him to fuck off. I was molested by my brother. No one in the family knows. I thought my mom knew and just recently found out she didn't. Haven't really talked about it since. I definitely feel like I've always been off and never knew why. More recently, I kind of had been looking back on my earlier life and think that could have fucked me up, and I just didn't know better. Not sure if this is the right place to say all that, but fuck it, who cares? Found out that my dad, whom I've had a very strained relationship with since my teen years, I'm now in my mid-30s, sexually assaulted my then best friend or next-door neighbor's mom. She would have been in her mid-20s, divorced mom, 4 kids, attending the local university. The only reason we found out was because my mom bumped into her one day at the grocery store and hadn't seen her for a while and asked how she had been. The poor woman broke down then and there and spilled everything to my very shocked mom. Said the reason she never confronted my dad or told my mom or anyone, not even the police, was because he didn't want to ruin our family. My mom, who by this point had been divorced from my dad for several years, then contacted him to hear his side of the story. He came clean, told her it was all true, and blamed his drug use for his actions. My mom was extremely hesitant to call me and tell me because of the very fragile relationship I had managed to maintain with my dad. And when she did tell me, it absolutely destroyed me mentally. I went into a severe depression for several months. I had to go to therapy for nearly a year. I was so disgusted by his actions and so heartbroken for her and her family, and for the fact that she was so concerned about not breaking up our family, that she held on to that for nearly 2 decades. It suddenly made sense why my best friend stopped hanging out with me for seemingly no reason. His mom told him what had happened a few years after. It's been 4 or so years since that all came out. I still think about it. In fact, just the other day I randomly started thinking about it and began wondering if there were others. If so, how many? What did he do to them? Did anyone ever try and report him? I began having a panic attack and had to call my mom to talk it out. Hopefully this answers your question. If not, feel free to ask for any clarification. Talking about it helps me not dwell on it.